So now I want you to create a new file and save it. And it's going to go not in the JS directory, it's going to go in the base directory for our project. And it's going to be called .babel rc. Okay, this is how we're going to configure Babel, which is actually going to do the transformations on our code. So there's a couple things that we're going to be doing here. We're going to be using what are called presets. We're going to be using 2 of them. The first one's pretty easy. It's called React. This is actually what's going to do all of our JSX translation. So we're going to write JSX, and that's going to get transformed to JS. Also, little known fact about this preset, but it also includes the flow transformations. So when we go to do flow, we don't have to do anything else. It's already included with React. Okay, so that's the first one. Oh, and so to talk about presets, the way that Babel works, Babel is a transpiler, a compiler, right? You're going to take one set of source and you're going to transform it into something else, right? Each kind of transformation is called a plugin, right? So for example, arrow functions, right? Everyone loves arrow functions, right? Right? Yeah, I thought so. Arrow functions is one kind of plugin, right? So you have a plugin that takes arrow functions and it transforms it into functions. So that individual transformation is called a plugin. It would be burdensome to include every single plugin that we want, right? If you try to include every transformation for ES6 to ES5, that's something like, I can't even estimate. I'm guessing it's over 50 plugins though. So including each one of those plugins is kind of like really annoying and not necessarily something we want to do. So they had the foresight to create things that are called presets, right? And a preset is a group of plugins. That's really all it is. So React, I believe, is 3 plugins. It's the JSX one. It's another one for, so one of them is so that Babel can understand JSX. One of them is so that it can transform JSX. And then the third one is flow. So I think that's all that's in the React one. A lot of times you'll see people do things like here it says like ES 2015, right? Which is totally valid. You can put that, and that would transform everything from ES6 or ES 2015, those are synonymous terms, to ES5, right? The problem with this is that we're getting to the point where browsers can understand a lot of ES6, right? So there's no point, we should not be transpiling ES6 to ES5 if it already understands ES5. So it's kind of this moving target as browsers get better and better. Also, that we're introducing more and more features, right? Because there's ES 2016, 2017, 2018. Yeah, 2018 just standardized. So like there's all these new features coming all the time. So as you may imagine, trying to keep this up to date is impossible, right? Because it's always moving. Unless you're always on that repo every single day, which I'm not. I don't know if you are, but I'm definitely not. It's kind of a pain. So the current maintainer of Babel, Henry Zhu, or LeftPad as he's known on Twitter, came up with this idea for something called env, E-N-V. I love env. This is one of my favorite features of Babel. This is basically the like auto prefixer, but for JavaScript. So specifically, what we're going to do here is we're going to put this in an array, and we're going to make this an object, and we'll just put that in the same line. And we're going to say targets, and we're going to say browsers. And what we're going to tell it to target the last 2 versions. So what this is going to do is it's a moving target. Basically, you're telling it as the browsers keep improving, keep moving that target forward. So this is going to support, I don't know, what are we on for Chrome right now? Not Mac, about Chrome. So we're on version 58 right now for Chrome, right? So it's going to target 58 and 57, right? And then when 59 is released, it's going to target 59 and 58, right? And it's going to keep moving that forward. Same for Firefox, Edge, Safari, and all those. And the way it does is there's another package called compat table, and it's just constantly reading from compat table. So there's a bunch of things that you can do with this. You can say, like you can pin it. I think you can say something like Chrome, like 56 or something like that. I don't remember the exact syntax, but it's similar to that, where you can pin it at a version as well. So really, really cool. I definitely suggest that if you're doing something like transpiling ES 2015 or something like that, that you migrate to env. This is going to be better for you. It's going to make your bundle smaller, and it's going to make you go faster, for sure. It's basically code that updates itself, which that's like my favorite thing. Code that I don't have to write. OK, any questions about env? You can also target things like Node, right? You can tell it Node versions to target, because sometimes you need Babel for Node. In fact, we will later today. You can tell it to target things like IoT, different IoT versions of JavaScript, various different cool stuff. OK. The next thing is something that I personally do. I leave it to your discretion whether or not you want to do it. I'm going to say loose : true. Set this in JSON so we can see it better. So a lot of these different ES6 features and ES6 and beyond, in order to be spec compliant, that is to cover every single use case, the code goes from really small to very large just by handling all of the edge cases, right? Most of the time when you're writing these features, you're not having complex interaction of classes versus generators, right? Like you don't run into these crazy edge cases that they do have to provide for. So that's what loose mode is saying. It's saying, hey, I'm not doing super crazy stuff with the edge cases. Go ahead and include the smaller bit of code rather than the huge bit of code. Now, as you might imagine, this is a double-edged sword for sure, right? Sometimes you actually might be running into those edge cases. And so if you are, when env moves you to a later version of JavaScript where it's moving you from the transpiled version to the native version and you're running into that edge case, you can have that interaction not be the same, right? There's potential for breakage here. This has not bitten me in the ass yet, so far so good. So again, do so at your own discretion. And there's nothing, like for example, this workshop today will be totally fine if you put false. Your bundle's just going to be a little bit bigger because you're going to be including more. Lastly, we're going to say modules, and we're going to say false here. And there's a very specific reason that we're doing this. We're telling Babel to not transpile the modules. So typically what would happen here is Babel would migrate this import React from React. It would transpile this to const React equals require React. This used to be required for things like Webpack 1 to work, right? But we're using Webpack 2, and Webpack 2 is ES6 enabled. So this is basically telling Babel to say, Babel, don't touch the modules. Webpack is going to worry about it. That's what this particular thing here means. Because Babel is going to run on the JavaScript code before Webpack starts putting it together, right? So you're just telling Babel to skip the modules, let Webpack worry about it. Any questions about that? The reason why we're doing this is so that we can do that live code inclusion stuff, because if it gets transpiled to the dynamic stuff, Webpack is going to say, oh, everything's required, right? I don't know what's required, so I'm just going to include everything. Whereas if you leave it as ES6 modules, it can do that static analysis and say, hey, this code is impossible to run, I'm going to leave it out. So by doing this, we're enabling live code inclusion or tree shaking. Cool? OK. That's it. That's our Babel setup for now. But I wanted to take the time to explain to you so you understand everything that's going into this, right? So it's not black magic. I mean, it's still, I mean, Babel's kind of black magic still.